Hey guys, it's Dasha. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video, which is a wrap up and review of everything I read in the month of March. March was the month of the full round of the Game of Tomes readathon, which I co-host with Ray and Robin. We had such a great time, honestly. I loved how everyone was like into it. I loved being able to have little group chats with all the different houses over on the Discord. Like there was just so much about it that I loved. The reading sprints, everything. So thank you to anyone who had joined us. We loved having you. I loved participating, even though I created it. It was fun to actually participate in it as well. I'm just really proud of what we've done, the three of us. So I completed my TBR for that. So we'll go over the 5 books I read for that, plus a couple of other books. No, just one other book. But overall, it was a really good reading month. I mean, there was a lot of books on my TBR and I read them all, and they were not small or easy books. And on top of that, they were all like pretty high ratings. So overall, it was a good month, and I'm really thankful that it ended up being good for the readathon too. Since there were a lot of really high ratings, my usual order of least favorite to favorite is going to be a little bit skewed. I'm going to start with the book that I didn't rate because I guess it's kind of the lowest rated. Technically it's unrated, and that was Bunny by Mona Awad. Bunny is this weird horror thriller psychological book about a group of 5 girls in this writing program at this elite liberal arts college. 4 of them are really close in their first year. They call each other Bunny and they act really weird and obsessed with one another. It's very culty, and you follow Sam, who's the 5th girl in this program that's not part of this group. She always kind of observes them and thinks they're kind of whack, but then in the 2nd year of their program, the girls that are part of this Bunny clique invite Sam to their slut salon, which is this kind of, let's call it a workshop for their writing skills. And Sam finally figures out what these girls are all about, and it kind of spirals from there. This book is known to be weird. Everyone told me it was weird in everyone's reviews, that's what they say. And they're right. This book is a disaster. Like, I've never read anything like it, but it's a disaster in just like a chaotic, fun way. Like, you don't know what's happening. You're along for the ride the whole time. And you know what? You just gotta take it in stride. You know, it is what it is. I've seen this book described a million ways. When I was reading it, the vibes I got were The Secret History meets My Year of Rest and Relaxation, because there is an aspect of academia and the elitism in academia and kind of how ridiculous and pretentious it is. But there's also that element from My Year of Rest and Relaxation and this kind of millennial angst, figuring out your place in the world, and also figuring out your existential dread of fitting into a body that you didn't really ask to be put in and put on this earth in. So I really like that kind of mishmash of everything. I remember reading it, and there was a specific part I had to underline and like make a note in the book saying, this is the moment I officially lost my mind with this book, because it is weird. I literally had so many moments where I was sitting and reading and I was just like, because you don't know what the hell is happening. It is such a mess. Like, everyone that says it's weird is 100% right. Did I love it? I can't really say. Did I respect what it was doing? 100%. There was some really interesting discussions of the way that art is treated in academia, how it's all supposed to be like deep and pretentious, and is it really good just because it has some weird meaning? Or maybe it's just bad, and just because you put a meaning to it doesn't mean it's good. So there was that really interesting discussion. There was a lot of discussions about how women can be taken seriously or not taken seriously based on how they act and they dress. That one was a bit more subtle, but I felt like there were some really interesting like beginnings of discussion in there. They wasn't really in depth because the book was just so weird plot-wise and writing-wise that it felt like it almost took away from those cool discussions, but they were definitely there. And I feel like this was definitely a book that you can sit and chew over and discuss with people, because there's a lot in it hidden behind all the crazy wacky plot stuff. I wrote down in my notes that like weird isn't even the right term for it. It's kind of disorienting because the book changes its writing style often, and the plot changes direction, and then Sam, our narrator, changes her tone after a certain point in the book, and it just begins to mess with your head, so you're not sure what's real. The whole time you're not sure if what's happening is real. But overall, I would say I liked it. It was definitely a fun experience. I really enjoyed the experience. I don't know what to rate it because I can't tell if it's any kind of objectively good or bad. I know that's subjective in itself, but like I usually try to compile both my feelings and what I think are the objective qualities of a book to form a rating. For this one I just couldn't, because it's just an experience. It's a work of art. It is not something to be judged critically on a scale, a numerical scale. It just is. And I would really recommend it if you think you can stomach it, because it is definitely a little gruesome at times, but it's just so much fun, so weird. You're just pulled in along for this crazy ride with all these girls, and before you know it, you're like hooked. It took me only 2 sittings to read this, I think, because I was just like, I need to know what happens. Everything's happening so fast and I need to know how it ends. So yeah, like I said, I would recommend this. I think you should give it a try if you are interested in it. If you've heard a lot of other good reviews and you think it might be for you, definitely try it. I think it is a really, really interesting piece of literature. I don't really have much else to say on it. The next book I want to talk about is As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. So this is a classic work of American fiction. This follows the Bungeron family as they are bringing the matriarch back to her final resting place with her family in a different town, but they encounter all sorts of obstacles and they're dealing with a lot of their own personal issues. This is a book I heard really, really great reviews from Better Than Food book reviews. He has a channel where he just does like single standalone book reviews and he's got like tons of views. It's absolutely insane. Like he just has this like charisma, and I love when he talks about books, and certain books he makes me want to pick up, and this was one of them. He gave this a glowing review, so I thought maybe it was time for me to pick up, you know, as a way to get back into classics. This one's a bit more modern, I would say, and it's definitely short, which makes it a lot more enjoyable, and it's written in such a different way that I thought it would be fun to get myself back into classics with this rather than like Dickens or something. So I picked this up and ended up giving this a, I think I'm sitting on like a 3.5 star. The writing in this is very difficult because most perspectives are written from inside the characters' heads, and these characters live in the American South. So it's written in their vernacular, and some are obviously more highly educated than others. So the ones that are less educated are very difficult to read from because some of the words aren't even like real words, it's like slang. So it made it a little bit difficult, but once you get into it, it's very interesting. The way I described it to myself when I was thinking about this book while I was reading it was that these are not even characters. The people in here are people. These felt like entirely real people with their own issues and concerns and their own obstacles to get through in the face of this tragedy in their family, which is the matriarch, the mother, dying. And it felt like they all had these very real things happening with regards to her death, but also in their own lives. And it just made them feel so whole and complete. I couldn't think of these as characters. They felt so real. They felt like people. And I thought that was particularly astounding. Of course, we also have the thematic content in here, which is so deep. There's so much to explore here. Obviously, the topic of grief and what it means to be alive, what it means to exist, what happens when we die. Do we cease to exist, but we kind of don't? And what's especially interesting is that we have perspectives from a wide range of people. So like I mentioned, there's some people that were educated, not educated, but it goes beyond that. We have the perspective of the mother's like 6 or 8 year old son who's a child who's grappling with the concept of death for the first time. You also have like 2 of her older sons, 3 of her older sons, and they're all very, very different. And then you have her daughter who's dealing with things, but you also have her husband who is not really a good person, and you're really confused at how he's handling it. And it's just interesting to watch the family dynamics, but beyond that, you have a few people in their community. You have the doctor, and you have their neighbor who's also a farmer, and his extremely pious wife. It's just a spectacular tableau of this little community and the people in it. And it feels like a slice of life in the midst of this tragedy, and it just feels so entirely real. Like I couldn't stop thinking about this as if it actually happened. And I think that's the beauty in the writing of this and how it fully immerses you. I guess that's maybe the point of having the vernacular be the choice of prose for this, because you're fully immersed in it the whole time. I will say I definitely had to have the help of spark notes for this. After every like chunk of chapters, I went and I read a summary of it as well as the themes. That way I wouldn't read like the themes before and then be spoiled. I know you can't really be spoiled for a classic, but like I'd like to still, you know, I'd rather experience it as it's written, right? So I really enjoyed that spark notes gives you like, for some books, they give you summaries of every little chapter, and then at the end of of a group of chapters so you can see like the themes and the exploration a little bit deeper of what happens. And that's how I read this, and I would recommend that if you are planning on doing it. I think it just deepens your understanding of what the characters are going through and what's going on in their minds. And additionally, because of the vernacular, I completely missed, I think, like 2 major plot points because they were just described in a very convoluted way. So I found that having the little descriptions of each chapter and what happened in a very dry, like this is what is happening way really, really helped. And then I was able to just enjoy what I'd read and reflect on it a little bit better than if I just read it and was stuck like figuring everything out by myself. I think if you're looking for classics that are like easy to get into, I would honestly, because of the SparkNotes thing, because of how short it is and because how obvious the themes are, I would kind of recommend this, to be quite honest with you. I feel like there's a lot of content to unpack in here for yourself. So if you want to read classics for the goal of deepening like your critical thinking skills and figuring out themes in books and that kind of stuff, if that's something that you enjoy and you want to get into with classics, this is a great one. There's a lot of symbolism and imagery and thematic content that'd be great to pick apart. Additionally, because there's all these resources on the internet like SparkNotes to help you, I think it makes it such a great reading experience. I honestly, like I said, I think SparkNotes helped the reading experience. I feel like I got so much out of this book, and it's a book that I would definitely reread to kind of get more out of again. The reason I gave it 3.5 stars, I guess because it sounds like I'm gushing about it, I didn't love it. It wasn't like a great reading experience like, say, Picture of Dorian Gray is, or 1984, which are classics that I personally love. This was a bit more difficult and it was a bit draggy at times. Like, it wasn't consistent throughout, especially in my enjoyment, but the parts that were great really were great. So I would recommend this. It's short, it's impactful, and it's really, really interesting. So the next book I read was not on my TBR, but my library hold for it came in, so I decided to read it because it's super short, and it is 21 Things You Might Not Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph. This is an incredibly short book that was actually originally an article, if I'm not mistaken, just outlining some things that are buried in the Indian Act, which in Canada is the piece of legislation that dictates how the government interacts with Indigenous people in Canada. It's a piece of legislation that has caused a ton of harm to communities. It is extremely discriminatory, and it still dictates the lives of Indigenous people. Its effects are still felt, even though some parts of it have been repealed. It still has a lot of weight in Indigenous communities and how the government treats them. This was a really, really interesting insight into not only the history of the Indian Act, but also its effects. The book made sure to not only demonstrate what the legislation was and what it meant, but also how that translated to actual realities for Indigenous Canadians. The book also has a little section at the end talking about, well, why hasn't it been repealed still? And that was really interesting because you got to see the perspective of Indigenous Canadians that felt like maybe repealing it isn't going to solve all the problems. Maybe we need more comprehensive legislation. Maybe we need better outreach to communities before we consider just repealing the legislation and considering it done and everything's fixed in these Native communities. And it was really interesting to get that perspective. The author is an Indigenous man himself. He has faced a lot of the same generational trauma that other Indigenous Canadians face. So he was writing from a very deeply personal perspective, and it really added to the weight of the book. It really made it feel more personal, and you know that what was being written was real. It's not someone coming in from an objective perspective talking about these communities. This is someone from these communities, and I really, really enjoyed it. It is really accessible. For me personally, the tone didn't work. I just didn't enjoy it. It's a very subjective thing, but on the flip side, I think that would make it better. This is a book I think all Canadians should read, to be quite honest with you, and I think because of its accessible tone, that makes it a lot easier for everyone to pick this up, even though you might not be into nonfiction. It's a really quick read. It's like 100 pages, takes none of your time, but it's so important to see how we got to the point that we are in today, and to see the history of it, and to know that like this wasn't just a one-time thing. This wasn't just at the beginning of colonization in Canada. This is something that has consistently plagued Indigenous communities, and it's all been legal because it has passed through Parliament. It's just absolutely astounding, and I think it's a really, really important book to read if you are interested in reforming Canadian law and interested in reconciling with Indigenous communities and continuing to learn about them is the only way to do that. So I think this book is great for that. I personally also wish it would have been a little bit longer. I understand that this is supposed to be, and it was initially an article, and I understand it's supposed to be quick, like it's kind of like a listicle, right? 21 things you might not know. And it did that great, but I was just like, I was so interested in the historical side of it. That's usually my downfall. I want more historical details. I was so interested when, for example, he was talking about how traditional potlucks were outlawed, and he was talking about how they went underground. Like, I would have loved an even longer section about that. And he was also talking about how there are traditional pieces of regalia and traditional art pieces that are associated with the potlucks, and they had been confiscated. And I would love to maybe see them in the book or get a little bit more details. Again, that's a super picky thing. It doesn't take away from the book. I thought it just would have added to the book because I was super interested. But again, this is a book I would recommend to absolutely everyone. It was a 4-star read for me. I really liked it. It's super quick. I really think it's worth your time, and it's a really important book for educating and moving towards reconciliation. All right, so we're down to 3 books, the first of which there is a live show coming up on April 8th. I will leave the details in my community tab and down below once the live show link is created. We just don't have that up yet, and I'm not 100% sure of the time. I believe it is 12:30 Eastern or 1:30. I need to double check, but either way, it's coming up on April 8th on the Friday, so I hope you can join us. And obviously that's Sword of Destiny by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the second short story collection in the Witcher series, following Geralt, Monster Hunter, and everyone around him. I really was not sure how I felt about the first book until the end. The last short story where Geralt meets Yennefer, who is his love interest, just really got to me, and this book just continued to build off of those character dynamics, and I think I automatically loved this one even more. This one is a lot less focused on action and monster hunting. This is definitely focused on character relationships and expanding the world and introducing you to more characters. Ciri is introduced in here, and Ciri is a little girl who is destined to become Geralt's ward when she is not even born. He basically tells her parents as a thank you for saving them that I'm gonna come back in 7 years and your child is going to be taken with me to be trained because witchers are becoming extinct. And so you get to meet Ciri here, and I loved it because as soon as she got on page, you knew exactly who she was. You knew exactly what kind of person she was, and I loved her so much. Not all of the stories in here were created equal, I will say. I think that like the first 1 and 2, I was kind of not feeling it, but I even tabbed like the third one that I absolutely loved because it had me laughing out loud. It was so funny, and the characters and just the situations, it felt so cinematic and so like it was just so well plotted and well done. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed this aspect of like how well the stories are crafted. I find that everything is always so on point. There's no info dumping, yet you get a full sense of the world. The characters all feel so unique and different, and that's reflected in their dialogue. The pace always makes a lot of sense to me, even when there's a lot of conversations. You feel like everything is still moving along because you're either learning things or just getting more time with the characters. I really am loving this series. I've already started the first book in the reading order, Blood of Elves, and like, fuck, it's so good. This is definitely on track to become a favorite series. I have such a deep emotional attachment to this series. I can't put my finger on it, but like, I just love the character dynamics. The found family aspect of this is one of the absolute strongest things about it, and it's one of the best found families I think I've ever seen. There's just so much about this that like the world feels so tangible, and the characters are, I love it. I love it so much. Like I said, like this is a short story collection, so not all of them were great. That's why this got a 4-star for me. But it's just, it holds such a special place in my heart now already because of the game, and now on my 3rd book that I've started, and like it's just so good. I love it. Is it still casually sexist? Sometimes. But I think that it also subverts that a little bit. Like there's a lot of really powerful women in this world that give you a lot to think about and that are so fascinating in their own right. Geralt almost feels like he takes a back seat because these women are just so interesting and have so much more to offer. And I kind of like that. I like that it wasn't just all about the men, because while the men control the politics, the women drive the story. And I really, really enjoyed that. Yeah, sometimes they're described in ways that's a little weird, and like everyone seems to be falling all over Geralt. Like, yeah, okay, yeah, sure. But the women are fucking fantastic. Ciri, Triss, Yennefer, I love all of them in this so much. Yeah, so this got a 4-star for me. I'm so excited to continue this series, honestly. It's just making me more pumped. I think I might have mentioned it in my last wrap up, but I initially thought short stories were not a good way to get into a world, but I take that back. I think with this and the first one, you get such a good, clear idea of the main characters and the world that it's a great foundation for Blood of Elves. I think it's such a fun way to learn everything without being info dumped, and so I would recommend reading these two before getting into the Witcher series if you are interested, because I think you get everything you need in terms of exposition from these two short story collections, and you can go ahead into the story. I mean, if you play video games, I would suggest the video game, obviously. I don't think there's a single gamer who hasn't heard of it and maybe even played it, but like, it's so stinking good. Holy cow. That was also a great introduction, but I think the short story collections on their own would also be a great introduction into the world. I'm just obsessed with the series now. It's not good. So the penultimate book I want to talk about is a reread for me. I realized I've been rereading like one book a month, which is pretty good. I wanted to reread more. And I reread this because I have the sequel and I really want to read it soon. And that's The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. This is also an adult high fantasy. It's set in this world where there are these like migrating islands and this empire that's struggling to hold on to power because it's all these islands and they're all spread out. The emperor mainly runs his empire through these bone shard constructs, which are these creatures kind of melded from body parts of a bunch of different creatures, and they're powered by bone shards, which are taken from human beings, the subjugates of the empire, and there is commands inscribed onto them to make the constructs come to life and do things. And it's such a cool magic system, and it's like coding, which is kind of cool. Like I feel like I can't be coherent talking about this book because I've read it twice now. The first time was an arc that I got back in September of 2020. So it's been a little while because that's about when it was coming out in September. And I read it in 2 days. And it was my favorite book of the year. Like it was just, or one of my favorite books of the year. It was just absolutely fantastic. I was floored. I absolutely loved it. And while I loved it a little bit less this time around, it's still just so fantastic. There's so much about this I love. Okay, let me try to organize my thoughts. So I was talking about magic system, and that's one of the really cool things about this, and it's also a complaint I've heard from people that they don't really get it, or it's not like concrete enough for them, to which I will put forth a rebuttal. It's magic. Does it really make sense? Maybe not, but like, it's magic. Does it have to? I feel like that's an extremely biased rebuttal, so like, fair enough. But I really love it. I love how just deeply ancient this magic feels, how you know that the characters don't even fully understand it themselves, how there's so much happening with that magic. There's so much they don't know, but they still think they can wield it, and they still think they have some kind of authority over it, and the magic is just so much older than they'll ever understand. I love that personally. I also think the world building is great. Again, it's not info dumped. I feel like everything is always presented so naturally and you're not lost. I never felt lost when I read this, even the first time around. I felt like everything was close enough to what we can recognize. There's not like these magical creatures that are just roaming around and you're expected to know what they are. Like everything feels somewhat familiar, but at the same time, it's so unique. I've never really read a world quite like this. So that's one of my favorite things about this, is how special it is and how unique it is. Like I was sitting there reading it and I was like, I can't believe that the author in this object, there is a whole fucking world enclosed in this. Like that blows my mind because it feels so wholly real between the characters and the politics and their concerns and the world itself and the magic. Everything just makes so much sense to me and it's so unique and fantastic, and I absolutely love that aspect of it. The characters are hit or miss for me. Upon reread, I definitely did not like most of our characters. The exception, of course, is Jovis and Mephi. Jovis is a smuggler who is wanted by the Empire. Like, he's in a lot of shit because he's a smuggler, which is obviously illegal, but he's actually just a really, really good person. He takes on these things begrudgingly, like he rescues children. He's like, oh, like, I don't want to do this. It doesn't make me that much money. Like, I want to find my wife who's missing. And then he kind of like grows into his role. And then Mephi is his animal companion. The cutest fucking thing ever. The best relationship between the two of them. My heart literally was like melting the whole time. I don't even think I like animal companions that much, or I thought I did, but like this was so on point. I loved them so much. The way it developed felt very natural. The way that they both grew into their characters together, the things they went through together, just, oh, so spectacular. Oh my god. There are also some elements I noticed this time around. There's definitely some kind of almost horror-like elements. Like, there's kind of body horror almost, and there's these really interesting discussions of like free will and humanity that are almost approached in a horrific way. That makes it really interesting. Not that I would classify this book as fantasy horror, because a lot of it is kind of light and fluffy and there's a lot of exposition. It's not even that gory. There's not that much fighting really. But those elements of like that thematic discussion of free will was done in a way that was combined with these horror elements that I really, really loved. I thought that was so cool. And like, the beginning of the book is slow. I know some people DNF'd this or thought that the pacing was off. The beginning is definitely a lot slower because you're dealing with all these different points of views. And it's really hard to kind of get into, especially when you're trying to figure out who all these people are and where they are. But I find that once you get to the second half of the book, you just want to fly through it. There's so much happening. There's all these revelations. There's all these things being uncovered and discovered. Then the action kicks in, and then you're like hit with all these different discoveries all at once, and you're just like, holy shit, what is happening? I need more. And I absolutely love that. I find that it just keeps you absolutely hooked, and it's just so much fun to read. It felt almost like that moment when the character just like wakes up and like sees everything, and you're seeing that, but for a bunch of different characters. I don't know. I still love this. I didn't love it as much, like I said. I could see the flaws in it, but holy shit, is it still fantastic? Does it still have a hold on my heart? Absolutely. I really, really enjoyed this, even the second time around. It has like a 4.5 star rating. I kept it out of 5 because like, I love it. I want more people to love this. I feel like I'm one of the only people that like loves it fiercely. Like, a lot of people have read it now and they thought it was fine, but I'm like, no, this is brilliant and fantastic, and I love it, and I want everyone to love it. So if you haven't, do check it out. It's not a very dense fantasy, so if you're not like a huge fantasy fan, I'd say this is great for beginners because the writing style is not super dense. It is really interesting and engaging. The world is unique, and the characters, and there's just a lot going on. There's a sapphic romance, magic system's cool, animal companion, daughter who has lost her memory and is trying to gain the approval of her father. There's just a lot happening, and I love it. Ancient artifacts awakening. Like, what more could you want? It's so good. I'm so excited to pick up the sequel. Oh my god. And the final book that I want to talk about is a book that we already had a live show for over on Beautifully Bookish Bethany's channel. I will link it down below in case you have read this yourself as well and missed the live show. But that's Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. This is a fucking massive book, and this is the first book in the second trilogy in Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings, which is a huge, expansive fantasy world. The first book was the Farseer trilogy, which just followed Fitz, who is one person, but here you follow a bunch of people. You're mainly following the Vestrit family, who own a live ship. In this world, there is a substance called wizard wood. It's a type of wood, but when you build a ship out of it and 3 family members of consecutive generations die on board the ship awakens. It becomes alive, and it just becomes like a member of the family, and it's a lot easier to navigate, and it's just, there's a lot of benefits to owning a live ship. It also can navigate into the channels that bring you to the Rain Wilds, which are this like magical place where the wizard wood comes from. If you don't have a live ship, you can't go there. It's just physically impossible. It's super dangerous and magical. So there's a lot of benefits to owning a live ship. But with the Vestrit family, who own one, there's a lot of stuff happening within the family that makes it a little bit difficult for the ship to properly come into her own, because now there's ownership disputes, and there's pirates to worry about, and there's all sorts of other stuff. There's a lot going on in here. And besides just the Vestrit family, and you follow a lot of their perspectives, There's also Kenneth, who is a pirate who wants a live ship for himself, and he's got his own thing going on. Like he's special, but there's him, and then there's the Vestrits, and then you also follow like some sea serpents, and they've got this weird thing going on. Like it's a lot. There is a lot happening in this book, and in true Robin Hobb form, it was all spectacular, and I loved every single bit of it. This is such a breathtaking book in its depth. Every single character had so much going on. It's astounding how much she could pack into one book, because there's just so much happening in between the family members. There's a lot of conflict between them, but also externally. You see the happenings of the wider world, the town they live in, and all the politics happening in the town trickle in and impact the family, and you know there's going to be like bigger things happening, but you're also so concerned about the family in that moment that like there's just so much happening. Robin Hobb writes characters like no one else. I felt physically violent towards several characters in this book because they're just the shittiest people ever, and I wanted to fight them so bad. But at the same time, like, some of the characters were just like, oh my god, you're so precious, you deserve the world, I want nothing but the best for you. But again, in true Robin Hobb form, she puts them through it. She puts those fucking characters through it. No one is safe. Kind of like George R. R. Martin, you can't really trust that anyone is gonna make it through in one piece, because Robin Hobb doesn't care. She will tear your heart out and stomp on it. And I will let her. I'm gonna read everything she's ever written. I will say I enjoyed this a little bit less than the Farseer trilogy. I think having the singular perspective works better for me, because I really enjoyed getting that time in Fitz's head and seeing everything through his perspective. I think it just makes it a bit more cohesive for me. But I do also enjoy how you get, because of these different characters, you get different perspectives of the wider world. And it kind of makes it a bit more immersive in that sense. I feel like if you're also a person who enjoys multi-POV, this will definitely work for you better than the Farseer trilogy, because you get so many varied perspectives and so many different characters. Obviously, a lot of this book was set up. I don't know where we're going with the rest of the series. I can make some educated guesses, but there's truly no way to tell where this is gonna go, and I'm really looking forward to the next book. Honestly, there's something very, very special about Robin Hobb that makes me want to keep reading, even though, holy shit, it's painful. Her characters can be painful, and the things she puts them through is painful, but like, fuck, I'm gonna keep reading because she's just such an incredible writer. She writes some scenes that just absolutely hit you in the heart, and that you will never ever forget, and I love that about her. And even though I thought I wouldn't like this because it's based around ships and pirates, I still love this. I thought it was great. I thought that there wasn't too much focused on ship terminology and being on the ship. There was a lot more other things going on, which was great. Like, Robin Hobb can make me feel things for a ship. When the live ship this family owns comes alive, I'm obsessed with her. She's so interesting as a character, but she's a fucking ship. And then you have another ship called Paragon, and he's got his own personality, and I care for these people, but they're boats. It doesn't make any fucking sense. Robin Hobb is truly fucking she's something, honestly. I would say if you are looking to start with her work, I would almost recommend here, because it's a bit more like your traditional fantasy. I think the Farseer trilogy, because it was focused so heavily on Fitz and his internal goings on and like just his family, it felt more condensed, but it felt more dense to get through because you were only dealing with Fitz. This feels a lot more like a traditional fantasy. You got multi-POV. It's a little bit easier to get through. It doesn't feel like it slogs as much because you're switching POV and you're getting different perspectives. So I would say if you're looking to start with Robin Hobb, I would, of course, always recommend the proper reading order of all the trilogies in order. But if you're not sure, honestly, I would start with this. This is great. It's a lot more familiar, and it is just so fantastic at the end of the day. There's so many things packed in here. We talked for 2 hours in the live show, and I felt like there's probably some more we could have still talked about. It's just, there's so much happening. I would really, really recommend Hobb. And again, I would start with this if you're not sure about her stuff. I know it's 880 pages. A little intimidating, but her stuff is just so worth it. The payoff that you get for the things she sets up are so worth it. She's an absolute master at her craft, and I love her. That was it, friends. That was everything I read in the month of March. I am pretty happy with my reading month, honestly. I loved a lot of the books. I had great luck with most of them, and I feel like this is putting me on like a good path for my April reading. If you haven't seen, I posted my TBR. It's like one of the only videos I've posted recently, so if you haven't watched it yet, do go check it out. I'm just kind of talking about my reading plans, continuing a few series, obviously. You know, just some fun stuff that I'm planning to read. If you've read any of these, let me know what your thoughts were. I feel like a few people I know have read Bunny, and I feel like we're gonna have some heated discussions in the comments, so I'm looking forward to that. But also As I Lay Dying, because I think some people in my Trash My TBR video were saying that it was extremely dull. So if you want to share your opinions and argue with me in the comments, go for it. I welcome it. I'm looking forward to chatting with you guys about this. My social media is also linked down below. You guys can come talk to me there. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!